morning, everybody, and welcome to this leadership episode, 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name is Armand Farouk, and I'm here with my co-host, Nick Zagelski, and today we have a click in deal reviews, deal teardowns, enterprise deals from the head of sales at Ascend. It is the one and only Chris Surdi. Nick, why should people listen?
This was a really great episode around challenge questions that you can be asking your reps to help qualify, but then also de-risk your business. We also got into some really specific stuff around common compelling events that you can use to drive timeline, ways that you can open your reps up if they're not compliant with the stuff that you've been asking them to do, all sorts of frameworks to help you identify how do you de-risk your pipeline, how do you close business, and how do you get the reps doing it so you don't have to touch every single deal.
And 3, 2, 1, let's roll. All right, Surdi, welcome back to the show. We start every leadership show with your top 3 actionable takeaways.
Thanks for having me back. My top 3 takeaways are always test for deal intelligence with your team. I do this in 4 ways. Every time I do a deal review, I ask, who is the champion and why? Who is the economic buyer and why? What is the compelling event and why? And what is the compelling reason and why? If I don't feel we have solid answers for that or sort of confidence in that, I always dig a little layer deeper.
Boom. What's number 2?
Ask those reps challenging questions. For example, if I ask who's your champion and why, and I don't feel this might not be the right person, the right title, or the right champion, I always ask challenge questions around, okay, you believe this person is your champion. First question, are you on a text messaging relationship with this person? If you are, okay, you got a champion. Second question, have they sponsored or are they willing to sponsor you to somebody with power, an economic buyer, or someone with budget, someone who has final decision-making or signing authority? The third is, are they giving you confidential information, right? Or are they sharing information to help you win? It's more, hey, this is where you need to be to get the deal done. Are they telling you about the competitive landscape and how you need to position yourself against the competitors? You need how to get the deal done within the company. The other is how to, position yourself against the competition. And then the last one is, do you believe, and this is a total gut check, but do you believe that this person is selling on your behalf when you're not in the room? Not something you can validate very easily. You'll know you have that strong relationship and the person's selling for you if you have a really strong text messaging relationship.
All right, bring it home. What's number 3?
Number 3 is, as a sales leader, you want to train your team to be an Olympic salesperson. And I'm not just saying that because we're in the Summer Olympics right now. You want to teach your team how to make themselves better every single day through training, development, self-improvement. There's 3 ways that I specifically coach or advise my team on that. The first one is, look, for at least 30 minutes per day, you should be reading or listening to an audiobook on sales, watching your favorite podcast, 30 Seconds to President's Club, but doing some sort of self-guided self-improvement. Because the reality is like, yeah, we're all watching these guys in the Olympics right now, but they didn't sit on the couch for 3.5 years and eat potato chips, right? They were in the gym every single day trying to make themselves better. If you want to be an Olympic salesperson, you need to train every single day, more mental training and sales training in this case. You've got to train yourself every single day if you want to bring home that gold medal. The second there is game film review. A lot of folks, most of us, we either played high school football or basketball or volleyball or something, and we always watch game film as a team after the game. It's really important, in my opinion, to do this at least once a week. Now, I do it one-on-one with my team. We carve out an hour per week. And we're just watching game film together. There's no criticism, right? This isn't an attack. We're not being super critical. We're just watching how the call went and asking ourselves the questions. What do we think about this response? How do we think about that? This person said that. Maybe we could respond this way. Because if you don't watch yourself, you don't learn from yourself. We don't have eyes in the back of our head. We have to watch ourselves in these game film reviews to learn how to get better and also be sort of intellectually honest with ourselves, right? And the third is, just like in every sport, set a PR, set a personal goal or a personal record that you want to hit. And those can be easy goals, like I want to do 4 outbound closes this month, or I want to hit this revenue target this month, but then also for this quarter. I always like to challenge my reps to say, okay, what do you want to do this year? What number do you want to hit, whether that's revenue or new logos or whatever the metric is, and then back into it and say, okay, if you want to hit this by the end of the year, Here's what you need to do in this month and this quarter, and then hold them accountable to that, or help themselves hold them accountable because it's their personal record.
Amazing. So, Surdy, I want to go to the 1 and 2 takeaways that you gave. You talked about when you are discussing deals with your team, there are 4 main areas that you're digging in to validate, hey, is this deal legit or not? Is there a champion? Is there an economic buyer involved? Is there a compelling reason to make a change? And is there a compelling event? Then you are challenging the rep to determine how real each of those domains is. You gave the example, if there's a champion here, are we on a text basis? Are they giving us confidential behind the scenes information? Are they coaching us on beating the competition? What about the other 3? So let's go to the next one, which is economic buyer. How are you challenging or digging in on that? And what are the series of questions you're asking in that area?
Yep, that's a good one. On the economic buyer, my typical question is, when was the last time they bought something similar to us or in our space? And who was responsible for signing on the dotted line? Do we know the answer to that question? It's a different question of who's going to pay for us versus who typically pays for software in our space, right? Is that actually the CFO or the COO? Who typically is in that space? And it's a very non-aggressive answer to ask your champion should tell you, but sometimes, they're guarded. And so it's a non-aggressive way to understand the landscape of buying decisions within the organization. And so if we don't have that answer, now as a sales leader, I'm trying to understand where the risk is so that we can formulate a plan to remove the risk. The only thing we can do is try to eliminate as much risk as possible. There is risk in every single deal. I don't care how many times someone's renewed, there's risk in every single deal. And so the underlying motive here is just to reduce risk. And so with economic buyer, again, it's to understand who typically buys this type of software. If we don't know that, let's go find that out. And if we find out that somebody that we haven't talked to, let's come up with a plan to get in front of that person. Sometimes that's not through your champion. Sometimes that's through another channel.
What is your definition of economic buyer? I'm curious what you coach your team on.
It's the person who will sign the check. When they say go, everyone else moves.
Great. So in a lot of your scenarios, it sounds like that might be a CFO.
In our case, it's typically a CFO or a controller. It depends. But typically, yes, on the finance side. Our champions for our business are typically on the operations side. And so we, and as most organizations, need to do a tremendous amount of triangulation and multi-threading.
How do you differentiate between the role of an economic buyer in a case like finance or procurement versus the most senior executive in a deal? So for example, a CMO still has to get approval for purchases in a CFO, but one might argue that the CMO would be the economic buyer, and that's actually the person that we need to win over first.
Yeah, so I think in the end, if you're talking to a CMO, for example, and let's use COO in my context here. So we're talking to COO, they still need to go to finance for approval. It is more about positioning them to win and to make them look successful and to ask for allocation of their budget. Typically a COO, unless it's a really small organization, has a budget, has access to funds, needs to go through some procurement channels and some songs and dances. At the end of the day, it's their money to spend. It's about making sure the business case is solid enough to justify the expense or the investment they're about to make. When you and your champion have aligned and have a strong business case, and then your champion says, hey, I just have to take this to procurement, but they do need to get involved and we're going to need to have some conversations with them. Procurement's job is to do 2 things. Number one, not buy the wrong software or hardware, whatever it is, not to buy the wrong product, but then also to get the right price. And so what I coach and advise my champion to do before they make that introduction to the procurement person, and by the way, this also works with legal, is say, hey, you and I got a great relationship. You and I are both on the same side of the table and we're really aligned. Let's make sure none of that mud hits us. You want to make sure that you and your champion stay aligned because you're about to go down a path. Procurement's going to try and knock 50% off the price, or legal's going to try and tell you need a $150 million indemnification provision or some outlandish, ridiculous thing. You need to make sure that you stay on the same side of the table with your champion. When those sort of things get thrown at you, you know that they're not hitting both of you, but you guys are on the same page. That makes sense.
What exactly would that mean? If procurement comes in and they're like 50% discount, what is not having that mud hit?
It means you've already basically asked for permission before that mud was slinged from your champion to go back to your champion and say, hey, your procurement guy just asked for a 50% discount. You and I know that's not really reasonable. Can you have a conversation with that person? If you've prepped it correctly beforehand and have a strong relationship with your champion, the next conversation is, hey, Chris, we looked at this again. How about a 25% discount? You didn't have to engage in that conversation with the procurement person.
One of my favorite questions to ask when it got to proposal and negotiation phase is if I knew my rep had to give a concession or a discount to win a deal. I would always ask them, is this the last discount you will have to give? And are you sure? And how do you know that? And oftentimes it would force that conversation of you can only get one cut. One of two things will happen. They'll either say, let's cut and stop fighting, or they'll be like, no, there's another person. And then you can have them negotiate on your behalf.
So you've got a rep who's at this stage, and you're having conversations with them around the economic buyer. What are some of the challenge questions you are asking your rep late stage in a deal? And I guess this can go across any of the 4 domains you talked about earlier.
The biggest one is around the domain of compelling reason. So if they don't do this now, right, what is the opportunity cost and what are they leaving on the table as it relates to the justified business case you guys have agreed to? For every month of delay, how much operational savings are they losing? How much additional revenue are they missing out on? And does everyone on the other side of the table agree with that directionally? And you might have a little variances, 5-10% here, but directionally, does everybody agree with that? If they don't, let's talk to everyone and see where we messed up. Let's fall on our sword, say we made a mistake, and we will have the opportunity to sharpen the pencil on this business case, which will ideally sharpen the price or things of that nature. But it'll keep the conversation going versus something that's stalled out because nobody's stepping up and saying, we don't believe your business case is justified.
When you're asking these challenge questions, the champions make sense earlier in the sales cycle. At what point in the sales cycle do you expect to know all this information about the economic buyer?
You should have this information by either the solution mapping stage or at least in the pilot stage. So we have 5 stages here. Ideally, you would have that information in solution mapping, but by a minimum, you should have that information before we kick off a pilot. It's required as part of our customer engagement process. We need to know who well, we call them decision makers here. It's a little bit different than B2B SaaS typically, but we need to know who the final decision maker is before we're going to kick off a pilot. Pilots are expensive. They take a ton of time, a ton of resources. We're taking a risk. And so by pilot stage, that's the 5th of the 5 stages that we typically have. We need to understand who that is.
What are your 5 stages?
So we have prospecting, discovery, solution mapping, pilot, and then closed won. We treat closed won as the beginning of our relationship where we're going to grow with them.
What are the criteria you ask your reps to satisfy for you to deem a deal has moved from stage 1 to 2 or 2 to 3?
Yeah, from stage 1 to stage 2, they must know pain and gain, compelling event, and compelling reason. Stage 2 to 3, they must have those, plus a solid champion and understand the decision process and decision criteria. And then to move into pilots, they need to have alignment with the economic buyer and a solid business case. They're actually required fields in our Salesforce. What I often coach on is to be determined or TBD is not an answer to a business case calculator field that needs to be added. And so if you don't have those things, it's not, in terms of the leadership perspective, yes, we need it, right, to manage MedPick and to manage our pipeline correctly, but the rep really needs it to run a successful deal, right? So in the end, it's like if we're putting TBD on business case calculator because we haven't done the work yet, it's like you're only hurting yourself. Those are our requirements per stage, and that's what we've seen be successful.
Can you explain how you bring that up with the rep? Because I have to imagine you have new folks enter your organization and they don't know. I imagine you do a lot of expectation setting with your reps in terms of what they need to do when they enter your org, but inevitably folks are going to make mistakes. Let's say Armand is your non-compliant rep and you're doing a pipe review and he's got a bunch of TBDs all over the CRM. How do you bring that up with Armand and how do you voice over the change that he needs to make?
I asked, what is getting in your way of meeting your fundamental AE expectations? It's a challenge question. And there's a good reason to ask that question, Nick, because it could be that there's a bunch of stuff getting in the way of that rep's day to day that you as the sales leader don't even know about, right? Especially if you got remote folks, right? It's like, well, this customer needed this, and then so-and-so asked me for that. If I look at my week, about half my time was spent doing all these other things. Now I know something I didn't know before. And as a sales leader, I can say, okay, starting Monday, you're not going to have to do any of those things. I'm going to solve that for you. I work for you. At the end of the day, I'm a servant to the company and to the people that I lead. And as a servant leader, I'm going to move all those roadblocks, or do my best to move those roadblocks out of the way. And so now you ask your rep a challenge question, you learn something, and you go do something about it. Or you ask your rep a challenge question and you get I just didn't get to it. And then it's, okay. And is that what an Olympic salesman does?
Savage.
Right? I mean, the Olympic athlete doesn't skip the gym for 7 straight days and then say, sorry, coach, I was busy.
So we have our champion challenge questions. We have our EB challenge questions. Let's walk through compelling reason.
Yeah. So compelling reason. So this one is a flavor of a pretty standard model called the 3 whys. So why do anything? Why us? And why now? Right? And so why do anything? What is the business case? And these are generally coupled with the pain and gain. But again, somebody may have pain and just not want to solve it, or they just don't care, or they're 1 foot out the door and about to retire, or something like that, right? So why do anything? What is the negative consequence or challenge of their current state? And why do it now? What is the compelling reason to do it now? Is it you're not hitting your EBITDA margins or missing your revenue numbers, your targets? And then the why us, right? The why ascend. How have we positioned ourselves to win that deal? So that's the 3 whys. So what I do is I couple that reason with an actual date. Give me a compelling event date. In our business, a lot of times people are switching what's known as their AMS software. Seems to be a thematic theme this year. We just closed a deal recently, and the compelling event was we're moving from X AMS system to Y AMS system. The reason I want to do this now is by July 31st, we need to be off this old system and onto this new system. We were able to tie ourselves to that specific date. For me, a compelling event has a date. Like it needs to get done in Q2 or by July 31st. It needs to have a solid date and a solid reason. If you don't have both of those things, you have a deal that is at risk. Now, here's the good news. If you have a strong enough compelling reason and a strong enough business case behind that compelling reason, you can essentially force a compelling event. You can create sort of an artificial compelling event. In B2B SaaS, a lot of times we're creating these artificial events like, oh, it's the end of our quarter, we'll give you a big discount if you sign now to hit our quarterly number. That's okay, but you're cutting into people's commissions, cutting into margin, cutting into revenue. When your compelling reason and the business case model gets your champion or prospect to say, holy crap, every single month I don't adopt this software or go forward with these guys, it's costing me labor money. I'm losing revenue opportunity. I'm missing my retention numbers, right? There's some bad things that are going to be happening. And every month that you delay that, right, is just to your expense essentially. And so that has actually worked pretty well. And we just sort of started to index on that the last 6 months. And that's worked really, really well for us.
We did a newsletter a while back that talked Drive Timeline. On one side, you have hard compelling events, which would be a contract expiring, like they have to buy a new software or continue with their existing one. And then you have on the other side, cost of inaction, which is more of this slow burn or this painful burn every single day, but they don't necessarily need to solve it today versus tomorrow unless literally their house is on fire. Let's say I don't have a meaty compelling event like a contract expiring, and let's say I have a medium cost of inaction. What are some other common compelling events that you're able to find that aren't as easy as a contract switch?
So it's dependent on each business. And this is very specific to our business. Ours is a tech switch, an AMS transition. A really good one for us is a new hire or a departure. So now we're talking about personnel change. So when we have, and this can actually be applicable to other software offerings or other spaces as well, right? But when you have different sort of, players either getting hired or exiting the business, there's either a opportunity that is being created with that new hire, or there's a gap that's being created with the departure. They either need to fill that gap with software or a new hire, right? And so those are some really good, compelling events that also have dates associated with them. Somebody's going to start on August 31st. Someone's going to retire on September 30th. It gives you a really good hard date. Again, that's specific to us and our business, but I think that could be applied in other places. You also have market trends. Again, specific to us, but we are dependent on a bigger ecosystem. And that bigger ecosystem will set dates like starting January 1st, we're no longer renewing insurance policies in the state of California. We're pulling out, right? And so we didn't set that hard date. An external sort of, market did that for us. That's been really helpful. Growth is really important and applicable to just about everybody. When somebody has a new market, a new vertical, a new product line that they need to launch, there's generally a launch date associated with that. Going back to my B2B SaaS days, we were always looking for that. When are you launching the new app? When are you launching the new web service, right? Turner is a good one where they're like, we're launching, the Cartoon Network and Boomerang, and it's going to be available on Apple, Android, web, Roku. I think they've gone the way of the dinosaur now, right? We have these dates and we have this schedule. So we'll launch on Apple TV first, and then this, and then that. New product launch or new line of business, those are great, compelling events to attach to. And they also have budget associated with them.
There are compelling events that are externally imposed, like the industry change with the ecosystem you mentioned, or, for example, a vendor contract that's expiring. But oftentimes people are like, if one of those doesn't exist, they're like, oh, shoot, I have to give a discount. But there are almost always internal compelling events, whether it's things you want to do or product launch or other things that the world is not necessarily on you. And so what I recommend everyone do is figure out your top 5 timeline drivers for your business and put them on a list for your reps. You're seeing way more deals than your reps are seeing individually. And you're going to see one deal that closed over here because of this weird market trend. And it's your job as a leader to document that and get that in front of all of your other deals as well.
You want deeper on that. Codify it into your Salesforce CRM or whatever CRM you're doing so that once you have a large enough data set, you can actually run reports and you can analyze 67% of the time, this is my number one compelling event, right? 87% of the time, my champion is the director of operations. We just completed a massive codification project, and I use a combination of a generative AI software vendor as well as a virtual assistant. I needed a human in the loop, but we just completed that project to codify every single one of those qualitative MEDPIC inserts so that you can run reports and actually use data to make data-driven decisions. If you want to go one step bigger and you want to scale it, codify it and run reports every single week, every single month.
Can you tell me about this project that you did? You hired a VA, you got this generative AI thing. What was the project? Why did you do it? And if someone wanted to replicate it, what were the steps that you followed?
Salesforce is really good at drop downs. We ran a report. And every single time we have a closed loss deal, we have a closed loss, date, and we have a closed loss reason, and those are drop downs. It's not a free form. And so understanding the number 1, number 2, number 3 reasons for closed loss deals was just a simple report in Salesforce. The challenge is in MEDPIC, they're all free form fields. They're not drop down picks. And so your context or your qualitative data is so variable, you can't just run a Salesforce report on it. So essentially, we took 1 year's worth of closed deals, all the qualitative data, and broke it out into individual spreadsheet cells. Then we had AI software rip through the massive spreadsheet and assign a 1, a 2, a 3 to thematic qualitative data to turn it into quantitative data. Once it was in quantitative data, then we were able to run reports and identify what are our top compelling reasons, top compelling events, top pains, top gains. Every MEDPIC field is now quantified. And once it's quantified, you can then report on it. But I couldn't do that before, right? Because MEDPIC is open fields with context based on either your recorder has put it in for you or an AE rep types some stuff in. It's really difficult to understand that qualitative data until you've converted it or codified it into.
What did you have the VA do?
She scraped the CRM and prepared You have to teach the AI what it needs, right? Like you have to provide it like, this is the best in class. Now go look for that. And so she scraped all the data and then we use that to teach the AI. And then we have the AI run them.
Where'd you find the VA?
Philippines. She's been with me for like 3 years now. So she's great. I got a recommendation referral if you need one.
This was an awesome show. We are at 30 minutes, so we have to move to the final question. The final question is this. We talked about a lot of good habits that sales leaders can exhibit, but what is one bad habit that every sales leader should break so that all sales teams can get a little bit better?
You're not the smartest person in the room. Stop believing that you are.
That's why I'm here.
You have to teach your team, enable them, and trust that they're closer to the deals than you are. While you may have experience as a leader, it doesn't mean that that experience should override your team's gut feel on where the deal is and your trust for them. You have to let go of the deal and empower your team to be the best they can. Otherwise, you're just a helicopter manager, basically micromanaging, and that is not something you should be doing if you want to be a good leader.
Everyone, hang on for a 60-second recap coming up soon. Cheers. Alrighty, folks, it is time for a 2x2 recap from this episode with Chris Surdi. Nick, what do you have for your 2?
So if you have a rep who is not compliant with an expectation that you've set, instead of immediately going to, Armand, why didn't you fill this field out? Instead, ask a question. This is a challenge question where you might say, what is getting in your way from X, where X is the thing that that person needs to do? This gives the rep an opportunity to say, hey, this is the specific thing stopping me. Now you can focus on clearing those roadblocks. Or they can own up to the fact that they just didn't do it, where now you can have a, hey, come on, you got to do this thing conversation. But you shouldn't jump immediately to lecturing because there might be a specific reason they can't do that thing. When it comes to why make a change, compelling reasons, compelling events, the questions to ask the rep are, why do anything, why with us, and why now? And why now should have a specific date on the calendar tied to it.
3, there's a specific date that should be attached to a specific event. There are a couple different types of events you could look for. A switch in their software, a new hire, a departure, a market trend, or growth, for example, entering a new market or launching a new product. And lastly, number 4, here are my 2 favorite challenge questions. Number 1, you can ask your rep, when was the last time the economic buyer bought something similar? Number 2, who typically pays for software in your space? If you don't know the answers to those questions, you'll go get them. Alrighty, Nick, how can people help us out here?
Armand, you wrote a piece on how to find and drive timeline, where you covered the 4 different timeline levers reps can use, how to find and drive those levers early, how you should be reminding and revealing that stuff throughout the deal cycle, and some strategies in using commercial terms to close deals. I think folks listening will get some value out of it. So there's a link in the show notes. Check it out, and we will see you next week on the show.